integral circling has always been about balancing yin and yang and holding both sides of a paradox. One of the main teachings in authentic relating is, the polarity of dignity and humility and posture and collapse. And it really is a map for how to work with the complexity of communication with another person. I think integral circling is wonderful at decoding and working with complexity. And I think this is really important for our world. We're just swimming in so many different reality tunnels, politically, socially.
The container is now open. Hey everybody, it's Sai here. I hardly ever do intros, but this episode that you're about to hear is a little bit different. I'm actually not in it, I know. Crushing news. However, we are really excited to have Jason Diggs on for a second time. Jonathan and Jason are going to be talking about Jason's new integral circling school that is opening up this coming week, March 17th. Can you believe it? If you want to find out more information about the integral circling school, you can go to integralcirclingschool.com. And if you want to see the first episode that we did with Jason Diggs, I'm on that one, by the way, then check out episodes 19 and 20 on the history of circling here on The Container. So although the topic is the school that Jason's opening and how excited we are for him, as always, the conversation gets very far out there. I hope you enjoy.
We're welcoming back onto The Container none other than Jason Diggs. You were here for some of our really popular early episodes on like the history of circling, and that for me was really important. I really got a good understanding of the history of this lineage in a way that I'd never really had before, and from someone who lived it firsthand. So that was really incredible, and there'll be a link in the show notes to that episode. And then we're bringing you on now during this Lent season, and you're there in your very like monkish room there, so I had to bring up Lent season. And yeah, it's a time when you have a really exciting project coming up, so I'm gonna like hand it over and want to hear all about it.
Yeah, I want to share the origin of where this came from, because it was actually about the time that I recorded the episode with you last year, with you and Sai. And, I was in Hawaii. I had planned to be there for the whole entire winter. It was a very interesting project for me, because I invited people to come down and live with me for 2 or more weeks in Hawaii. I was doing this project on an eco-village. And I didn't want to do like a retreat or like a big weekend experience and then, go back to your life. I wanted to kind of have something in between, like a third space. And so I was experimenting with that. And there was people coming through my program, and there was about, 5 to 8 people at a time, because I allowed people to arrive at any moment. People could like arrive on any day, stay 2 weeks or more. Some people stayed 2 months. And we really got into authentic relating together, living together, like cooking together. And so it was a residential experience. And I was, in the beginning, I was leading some authentic relating game nights and different practices. And then about a month in, I just got inspired to circle people. I was like, let's do birthday circles. The group is like perfect size for birthday circles. And I ended up circling everyone who came throughout the entire winter. And it was just like a really deep and intimate experience. I remember about that time, like I got connected with you and recorded the podcast from Hawaii. But then there was this moment where I was like, maybe these integral circling teachings want to come back into the world. And I recorded a few videos, which was going to be the beginning of a course. And then I realized the project was much bigger. And so I put those 3 videos on the shelf and just sat with it for a year. And it was really in the background. I was, working with some other kind of family stuff and things happening in my life. Last year, I moved to California 3 months ago. So that was a big project of relocating here to Marin County. And yeah, this year it just came right back. I went down to Tucson, led a circling immersion, and people were really fascinated with like, what is this integral circling thing? There's something that you're doing that's different, Jason. And so really it got birthed from there. It's called Integral Circling School.
Awesome. That I noticed immediately what leaps up is like, what is that little something special? Like, I know from what I've seen and the people I've talked to doing this work, I think there's sort of a growing sort of like basic organic circle experience that a
Mhm.
lot of people who listen to this podcast would have some kind of shared reality on, like, okay, I know about an organic circle and maybe a birthday circle I've been in. But then there's this there are these people who came from the integral school who are like, yeah, and we have our own thing. And it's like, I know in me, there's so much hunger to know what is the difference, and what could someone expect to like learn that's special there at your school.
Yeah, and it's it's mysterious. It got to be like this little mythology thing because the integral circling school went underground and like stopped teaching completely for I don't know if it was like 4 or 5 years. I was flying around the world teaching authentic relating, and the two main figures and founders, Robert and Porcelli. Like, you've had Porcelli on the podcast. They kind of branched out and started doing different things. And the main training that we were doing at the time was called T3, where we trained facilitators in a 9-month training. That literally just stopped. And so it was the biggest circling training in the world. We certified hundreds of people. And then it just kind of stopped when the Integral Center in Boulder stopped, because we had that building as a community center in downtown Boulder, and that was really kind of fueling the whole movement. And it was the place that people would come to study, and then they brought it back to Australia, and they brought it back to Europe, and so what is different about it? There's a certain way in which I think integral circling is wonderful at decoding and working with complexity. And I think this is really important for our world these days. We're just swimming in so many different reality tunnels, politically, socially. And what do I mean by that? Well, it works with paradox a lot. Yeah. So if I was to compare it to Circling Europe style, which is now called transformational connections, I would say that their mode of leading, which they call surrendered leadership, is a radical yin, like leading from radical yin. And I studied with those guys and grew like crazy. My leadership grew like crazy. Like the level of trust in the universe that's necessary to lead a surrendered leadership circle is really high. It's a beautiful practice. And integral circling has always been about balancing yin and yang and working and holding both sides of a paradox. One of the main teachings in authentic relating is, the polarity of dignity and humility and posture and collapse. Like, that's one of the things that people remember from the workshops and take into their lives the most. And it really is a map for how to work with the complexity of communication with another person, right? And in leadership, if we're looking at balancing yin and yang, that's kind of the koan with which we're leading. And so in integral circling, we're the facilitators completely empowered to choose the thread that they want to go down. And it's like, oh, that feels like a distraction right now. Let's put a pin in that, or let's make a bookmark there. Maybe we'll come back to it. I really want to stay on this thing because I'm really curious about what's happening with your heart, Jonathan. You mentioned this thing, and I feel really curious about it. So it's like the no fixing, changing, or advising of circling, the welcome everything is the yin. And because we are rested in yin, we feel empowered to deeply bring leadership and masculine as well. And that's really someone who's well trained in integral circling. That's the basis of it.
Yeah, I noticed just hearing you, I could almost just feel like a different, like on an energetic level, I could just feel a different imprint versus like, I mean, yeah, like the beautiful like CE circles you're in. It's like a bath that you like step into and then you like step out of when you're ready, and it's yeah, and something I'm hearing, the word that comes up in me is like expedition, where you have like leadership that is um given the authority to like be tracking what's alive and to take on that responsibility. So yeah, so then I imagine participating in that circle, if you're not facilitating it, is almost like it's almost more released because you kind of have someone holding it for you and driving it, and then facilitating that. Yeah, I'm like, that seems like so far out to be facilitating that way. I've just never really done that before. Um, and that, yeah, that seems so exciting. Hmm. Yeah, and I'm imagining too, the like in the debriefing the circle, because it has that word integral in it. My assumption is that there's like a lot of shared understanding of the concepts of Ken Wilber or something, and that then you have a lot of theoretical, like shared theoretical territory to map out what happened in the circle, which is one of my favorite things to do in circling, is talk about the circle that just happened and like, you know,
Right.
figure out all the layers and things going on.
Right. Yeah, usually there is a shared framework between the participants, but even if there's not, the structure of it lends towards weaving shared reality. Like that is the basis of it. So even in the steps of integral circling, weave shared reality is a big part of it. Like setting context, giving people like clear conceptual scaffolding so that they can get into the practice, um, and saying clearly what it is. I I absolutely love my colleagues who are teaching relatefulness or transformational connections and all that. Like I'm well networked. I have the utmost respect for many of them, and a lot of times in just explaining something, and there's contrast is helpful. Like I believe relatefulness even says on their website, relatefulness is undefined. It's a mystery, and it's like that's beautiful as a pointer towards the transpersonal, like um, the mysterious arising that is me and my identity, and you and your identity in a non-dual universe. Like, how does that all match up to one another, right? But it doesn't help new people engage the practice to say that it's undefined. so So in circling or in integral circling, we say this is the definition, and we put a period at the end of the sentence, um, and then hopefully that structure allows for you know exploration into the mystery, right? And so weaving shared reality is a big part of it. Setting clear context is a big part of it, and actually even what you said, debrief. It's literally one of the steps of the circle. You never do a circling practice without debrief, which is kind of like a decompression chamber. Like if you're going to go, more than 20 meters below the level of the sea, like you need to come up slowly. You need to decompress. Otherwise, whatever the nitrogen bubbles build up in your blood and you can die, right? So we kind of do that. We have a debrief that's part of the practice, and it's acknowledging that this is not normal. It's not normal socializing. It's not friendship. It's something else. It's a practice that we engage. It's a relational practice that we engage in to develop oneself. And the the guidelines and rules of how to play inside the practice are different than normal life. And debrief is like the in between where we get to actually create those conceptual things for ourselves and for each other. And we've shared understanding.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, hearing you say that, I just have this warm, fuzzy connection to debrief. I honestly think that when I look at like the transformation in my life that circling played, like for me, circling was like the path to so much. And and debrief, like just spending hours with the people I just practiced with, talking about it a lot. I mean, like just thinking back to it, I can feel how it re-architected my brain in a
Mm.
way. It like really helped me. Now I host a podcast. It's probably, I'm a chatty guy. I'm a talk guy. Talking is high value to me. But it's like just remembering how that debriefing helped me sort things out and like make room for new insights and new ways of seeing. And that yeah, I've been in other communities of practice, and debrief was de-emphasized for like in order to have other enriching things. I
Mhm.
get that, like, there's many ways to integrate, but the what I'm hearing you talking about, this emphasis on debriefing, to me is like so core to um how circling transformed me. So I have like an allegiance to it, or something I'm feeling, and like a warmth.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, it's always going to be a part of people's the culture, right? People are going to talk about it, but there's something about making it an explicit step that happens immediately afterwards, and you save time for it. Can allow you to at least just bookmark those conversations that you want to have and talk about certain things when it's fresh. Yeah. Mhm.
Mm. Yeah, so then that has me wondering, like, we're now in a world where we're going to have a school opening up that is going to be training this again.
Yeah.
And it's under a radically different context than uh the first round of training integral circling facilitators. Like, just the technology you're using is different, the world is so different, the circling landscape is much different. And I'm like, all of that feels, I feel like we have the table set, and I want to like dig in now to yeah, the school and how it's addressing today, and yeah, the, I guess, like how you're looking to teach this this important art form.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. So at the very beginning of this year, the second weekend in January, I went down to Tucson, and the leaders of the Tucson community have just built a thriving circling practice community, and people are really invested in one another's lives. There's a lot of care and empathy that's really central to it, and it reminded me of some of the ways, some of the culture of the community in Boulder that I was a part of like 10 to 12 years ago when I was first learning this practice and first teaching it. And um, it really touched my heart. And they were encouraging me to do something. They're like, "Do you want to come back for a weekend and train facilitators?" And I was like, "Yeah, maybe. I think that could be something that we do." And I don't know if just one weekend is sufficient. We used to do 9 weekend intensives to train circling leaders. Um, and yeah, I'll get to more about the online school in a second. But like part of what was so interesting to them is I was doing this thing that we call experiments. So experiments are a part of integral circling. People would come for a 9-month training. On weekend 8, they would do a certification circle process. And then after they certified, we would teach them this thing called experiments. And I was doing this in the Tucson community and they were fascinated by it and there was discussion around it. And I'm like, well, if I want to teach the depth of where this goes, I need to have the foundation there. And I don't want to build a big training company. I don't want to, fly all over to, multiple cities and do lots of weekends. Like I've done that previously in my life. And so that's when the online school started to take shape for me. And I just, I asked a lot of colleagues and talked to some of my former teachers about it. And so the online school just allows us to get into it with people, lay the foundation with a lot of self-study course videos, and then get right into practice. And facilitation as an art form, I think for people, uh, it can be one of the most profound growth catalysts because as soon as you sit in the leadership seat, all of your tendencies towards posturing collapse will come up, right? And leading and then getting feedback on your leadership in real time, on your facilitation, is the primary way to grow. So it's like the getting the conceptual territory out there. Yes, we used to do it in in-person courses for sure, and it's more enjoyable that way in some ways. But online, it's way more efficient. So we're going to be able to train people and get them into the sort of like someone experienced could come and get certified in 4 months if they want to like really lean into it. And so it's going to be a different price range available for people. I really want the online community to be a learning laboratory as well. Kind of what I was saying before in terms of this complexity, like integral circling is more structured and more defined than other schools in some ways. But I want to explore the transpersonal. I want to explore spiritual experience through this practice because I think it's happening often for people. And it's more secular. There's not, a shared belief structure or, a lot of terminology around it. But I think getting into an integral, what's called the we space. I don't love that term, but getting into the group field and like relaxing your ego and kind of diving into the spirit and the waters of transpersonal connection in a group is super rich for people. And so I want to really attract a group of high level practitioners who want to study that as well together. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hearing you talk about well, it's interesting. It kind of begins with this real world example of the running of experiments in a circle, and then this grander vision of like having a group of people who are experimenting on many levels, on many altitudes, experimenting. And I mean, and I also, I'm like so alive from your share, like to me the spiritual component of it has been so powerful for me in my life that it's like it's interesting. I met someone recently. I made friends with someone who hadn't circled in a very long time, but he was actually living in San Francisco and was like rubbing shoulders with circlers in the Audis, like in the late Audis, like the very early days.
Mm-hmm.
And like he was like confused at us talking about circling as this kind of like path to non-duality and this kind of like a yoga of its own. And like he was like, kind of like when I was introduced to it, it was not that there was not the vaulting ambition that this will like, bring you beyond Maya and into union with God consciousness. But I think that's like it's there. It's like something beautiful about circling is that it can be really interesting and fun in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
It can begin to improve the relationships that are really important to you in your life, and including with yourself. and then it has like no limit to where it can take you.
Right.
It's just like, I mean, you know, what more could you ask for from a modality?
Right? Exactly. It's like the perfect bait and switch that God just has us on the hook of like, hey, come over here and learn to speak your truth and tell and like be authentic. You can be however you want right here. And then it's a slippery slope into like merging with another person,
Mm.
um, to the point where you don't know where you end and they begin, and you start to interpenetrate one another, and giving each other feedback for how we're showing up, um, is one of the more challenging parts of circling, because it presses on our ego, right? It's like if I get, if you and I are friends and colleagues, and like you tell me, Jason, this thing that you do is rubbing me the wrong way, or I don't like how you're showing up. Like I have to digest that information. I have to like open my ego enough to receive the feedback and then digest it, and like my sense of self transforms through giving and receiving feedback. And in normal everyday life, we don't often do this. It's just not very polite to give someone feedback about how you're experiencing them. But like in the circling culture, we do it a lot. And so I think that is the beginning of the path. And then when we get comfortable with like really speaking our truth and really receiving feedback from others, um, it kind of vaults us into this other realm of being mirrors for one another. uh, you know our soul's path and evolution um, can really unfold and blossom. um, yeah, it's a place for spiritual friendship, right? you
I
know
love that phrase. Can
yeah,
you say more about that?
yeah. Well, I feel that with you. Yeah. Yeah, we don't know each other super well, but like we've connected and kind of worked on tiny little projects together. And I feel, um, yeah, just appreciating of the difference between you and I. Like the way you show up is quite a mystery to me. And, I show up on a podcast with you and you have this like religious iconic, what's the word? Iconography or something behind you. And I'm just like, um, I feel grateful for how audaciously you teach on the Tao Te Ching and also have a cross behind you. um, and so the appreciation of difference, like admiration of another person and their spiritual path, and like the willingness to learn from it. um, yeah, it's one of the most rich aspects of life. Yeah. And so I think, making friends with people through the circling practice, um, it just attracts a certain type of person. And yeah, what's it like to hear that?
Yeah, there's like I noticed there's a like a happiness feeling in my stomach hearing that. I think the reflections on me through you have me feeling seen or like appreciated, and then also feeling like um there's this there's like a sweetness to this idea of spiritual friendship that has me thinking about how circling trains us to like build a different kind of culture among each other.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I notice now I'm like shifting into like interesting podcaster mode. And I'm like,
Mhm.
oh yeah. And then there's this thing I'm like popping up to intellect now. There's, ethnomethodology is this study of cultures, not from like the 10,000-foot view, but like from how people talk and how people make choices, and like the culture from the ground up. And I think circling like changes the world that way. It changes the way that we are making decisions on the ground, and you can feel it when you interact with people who have like circling consciousness available, and that it's one of the modes of operating that they have on hand. It's like yeah, something like spiritual friendship becomes available. And like you were talking about feedback, um when you're around circlers, there's like you will get more honesty and authenticity, and also more like presence. It's like they'll say things that in other realms of life only like very harsh people would say, or like material that would you would only get into like when it's the breakup conversation and someone's yelling, you know. There's like that kind of like really important feedback content, but also this like incredible presence and softening into each other's into that like connection between us, so that there is just culturally it like just we produce a culture from the inside out that is much more available for like spiritual growth and personal development.
Yeah.
And also very long sentences where we're hedging. My mind is making a story that
Right. I'm appreciating you a lot, including your humor there. And yeah, I'm also great. Like, how do I want to say this? I want to make an interesting podcast, right? And that perspective is like in the back of my mind. And like sometimes it pushes to the front, and like it starts to steer my brain towards like saying the next thing that might be interesting to the viewer, right? Or listener. And when I drop that, there's like a palpable presence and trust that comes. And it feels a little bit like, oh, we're inside the practice if I drop that. And I think it's impossible to live in the world without desire and without agenda, right? Like the way that the ancient East really dealt with desire was through what's this word?
Asceticism.
Asceticism,
Something like
yeah.
that.
Which basically means like you put on chastity belt, metaphorically. You just like stop doing everything that's pleasurable. And I think in modern times, we've really realized that that's not the path, right? It just, the shadow comes back to bite us. It gets bigger if we try to deny it.
Mm.
But what we can do is notice our agendas and create a little bit of space around them. And I think that's why circling is so transformative for growth, is because we're just actively noticing this assumption, drop it. Noticing this agenda, drop it. Notice like not what I want, what do we want? Like even just dropping our own personal agenda for the sake of the group energy over and over again, dozens of times in the same circle. I think it really trains something in us that really deepens our wisdom, our practice, our ability to hold empathy and boundaries at the same time. And that's why I started this dialogue with, it helps us work with complexity. And I think this is the number one thing that we need in our society right now. There's so many messages that are like, everything's like this. View everything this way, right? There's so much propaganda. And integral at its heart is the opposite of propaganda. And it teaches us to hold multiple perspectives. And I believe this is a sacred thing. Like when my religion and culture encounters your religion and culture, like, curiosity that leads to understanding, or is there genocide? Like this is an actual thing that humans have a choice around, right?
Yeah, I'm noticing in a circle, the yoga is to like take in, if we are circling together, I'm taking in your perspective, which is like this other guy in the room who like literally has a different like visual perspective, which you can drop in so hard in circling that you can almost like just see the world literally through someone's eyes. And then but then also it's like, okay, can I drop my presumptions and really listen to Jason and learn how to talk, like learn how to lean into my curiosity and ask the questions so that I can like really get what Jason is experiencing before I'm leaping to like how I'm responding to Jason. And like and so there's like there's a very lived experience of like literally getting someone's perspective.
Right.
Yeah, and then I really love this like connecting it to in a like, this is such a dated term now, but it's actually really true now in a way it wasn't back when it was used a lot, but in a global village. There's just like um there are these like what appear to be really radically different
Mhm.
viewpoints, and that are like these egregores that almost live outside of humans, and people like move into them, and yet they're like these huge like storm clouds of belief. And
Mhm.
it's like, yeah, can I actually like at that altitude, can I take in them like they're in a circle with me, like
Mhm.
and it's hard for me. I mean, I do attempt it, but it like it can be hard.
Right.
It can feel wrong or something. Um and that's how it's the work. It's that it's definitely the thing you need to do, and it's hard. Then okay, let's cook.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I love what you're saying. And wrestling with complexity is hard. It takes mental, emotional, and spiritual effort. And there's so sometimes I get down on the new age and personal growth cultures out there because I see a lot of delusion.
Mhm.
I see a lot of teachings that um, my judgment is that they really lead people in the wrong direction, so to speak. And there's one that comes down to like, oh, life is meant to be effortless, or like flow. If you're in flow, you can create from your desire. You don't have to create from your effort. Like so there's a whole grouping of teachings that yeah I don't fully respect,
Mhm.
right? And integral circling, it really approaches the practice as like, this is a practice. You're not always going to feel like it. Let's put in some mat time. It's not always going to feel good. There's a discipline to it, right? Um, how are you showing up? Let's give each other feedback about how we're showing up. Um, but there's also like a deep empathy in it, right? Like that's what the new age and personal growth worlds really do a lot, is like they have a lot of empathy and allowance and self-care. Um, and my own personal belief is like all of these things that live in a polarity. And we really map and understand the polarity, including the shadows of both sides. We can hopefully not fall for some of these really distorted, diluted teachings out there. And we can have a lot more discernment. And I think that's what's a little bit different about this school, is it really holds things up to the light and it's like, is that true? if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. Is that true? I like to pick on this teaching.
Yeah. Oh, that is so rich for me. That's really feeding me right now, hearing you say that.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed in particular something that really came up for me recently. I was at a big like kind of new age woo like get together thing where there are tons of workshops everywhere and stuff. And um something I came away with was like this phrase mere permissivity, where it's like the opposite of the ascetics you were talking about. Like there's this the ascetics who are like sitting naked on the mountaintop in the rain, not, fasting for weeks on end. And then you have people who are like, um, yeah, like merely allowing themselves to like pleasure the id.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yeah, we don't actually have to set these up either as like they're wrong. It's like it's a polarity, and like sometimes the energy calls for like a little bit of sitting on the mountain in the rain, and sometimes it calls for a little permissivity and a little like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
lead from desire. And it's like it doesn't have, yeah, is it true that it's always the mountaintop in the rain? Is it true that it's always yeah, saying yes to cannabis and masturbation, sex magic? Like those are probably, not it's not an on off switch or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my hope is that through teaching a little bit of integral theory and a little bit of uh, just psychology and human development along with the circling practice, that people in the moment will have more discernment around like looking at something, and they're invited to interpret a situation. And just to use the example I said before, uh, if you're dating someone and you have a feeling of like um, displeasure and dissatisfaction, you can either take this teaching, which is like, oh, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no, right? Or you could take something that's a little more complex, which is, this person is able to meet some of my needs and not others. And if I feel dissatisfaction, I have to learn to be authentic with them and see what happens, and actually give them a chance to show up to
Mm.
that authenticity, right? And so, um, yeah, these cliches that we find out there sometimes I think are a really bad way to make decisions, and like it just doesn't reflect um, also the truth that if you look at integral development, not only is there a spectrum of maturity um, that we lean into. One of my teachers used to say, emotional maturity and spiritual maturity are the same thing. There's no difference. Um, and not only is there a spectrum of maturity that we can come from, we wildly change on a day to day and moment to moment basis. And so if you judge someone based on what happened when they were triggered, you're not actually giving them the space to grow up and show up in a different way, right? Um, yeah.
Mm. Yeah, that has me really sitting with this idea of circling as a modality of maturing, or like circling as a way to mature.
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, and these topics of like um not having to hold things as so certain and true feels like this really incredible fruit of the practice of maturing. Is like um a little bit of not knowing is really good. So good for you on a lot of levels. And I know as like someone who, especially when I was younger, relied a lot on my intellect for as a source of value and as a source of like entertainment and as a source of like self-worth.
Mhm.
I know it took me a long time to like detach, and it's a it's a work in progress, like detaching from knowing things, like really, knowing things is so, I mean, it was scary for me. It continues to be scary when I find it again. It's one of those topics for me that at each rung of the spiral, I find it again in a new way of like, I need to let go of knowing this and
Mhm.
being the one who knows. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big part of my passion is translating some of these complex psychological and spiritual concepts into plain language that people can apply to their lives in a direct way, and really understanding the process of identification and disidentification as the cycle of growth. um, I think is super helpful for taking the medicine of circling and actually applying it to your growth and maturity. And what I mean by that is like we have these deep, deep identifications, and it doesn't unwind in one go. It's not like, does taking psychedelics help you disidentify from, like I'm similar to you. Like I was praised for my intellect by my father, and like I wanted to be seen for my creativity, but he didn't really see that. He saw my intellect, and like my identity got wrapped around that really tight. And it's been a process of loosening over decades, right? So maybe psychedelics helped with that, 2 or 3%, but really understanding development, um, integral development and transpersonal psychology, I think can really support us in our growth path. You know, so I'm teaching some of that at the school, right along, right along with circling.
Yeah. Learn how to facilitate circling and heal all of your core wounds. That's all Jason promises here, folks.
Well, not even healing. It's more complex than that. No.
Okay. Yeah.
Sometimes I like to say that a lot of times, well, this is my own belief. The nervous system is not often like similar to like healing a wound. It's more about making a new neural pathway and strengthening that new neural pathway, and then slowly the wound becomes less of a groove that we fall into on a habitual way. So healing is not the right word.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't. Our wounds don't. Our psychological and emotional wounds don't heal the same way a cut on our arm would, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak. Um, yeah, but maybe that was just a reaction to you claiming. I don't want to claim that I'm healing it.
Right. Yeah, humor, parody. Yeah, there's like I really like that insight because there is a I and I think the book has served a lot in this world. So I don't want to poo-poo the book I'm about to poo-poo. But I think like, and especially a overly simplistic application of an understanding like the body keeps the score. That
Mm-hmm.
sort of understanding of trauma and that sort of which it seems to be passing now, but the last 10 years seem to be really focused on this kind of like dimension of human experience. But yeah, I think that there is like an over physicalization of uh wounding, like psychological wounding and trauma where yeah, and I like this return or this reminder you just gave of like it's unlearning and relearning, and it's more like quitting smoking than healing a cut.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, yeah, there's that's like there's a lot of wisdom in there. I can feel it. It's like dripping with honey, what you just shared.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, we can make meaning and we can identify with things that are not as gripped and not as unhelpful. And I know that's a more cumbersome word than healing, but I think it's important to understand the complexity of it. Yeah, because
Mm.
the process of our ego identifications um, loosening and then creating a new possibility and then actually taking the action and making the choices that have that new possibility be happen more often than the old pattern is more realistic than the idea that we will heal through an experience.
Mhm.
And I mean everything. I mean taking a pill. I mean going to a psychotherapy session, doing circling, and the flip side, yes, we keep saying complexity is important, right? The flip side is our soul grows in strength through um, making choices, right?
Mm. Can you say that one more time?
Well, it's about resilience, right? If I could just take a pill and heal my anxiety, right? Then, which, I'm a person who has had a huge challenge with anxiety at different points in my life. Um, and if I could just take a pill and heal it, there wouldn't be an advantage to my soul's evolution for that. It would perpetually keep me in an immature state. But I believe the design of the universe is such that we are we get the opportunity to grow up
Mm.
and breathe through our anxiety and learn to work with it in different ways. And maybe this month it's taking a pill, and maybe next month it's like having the realization that I don't want to take the pill and I want to find a more healthy way to work with it. Right.
Yeah, one of the ways I conceptualize when I'm teaching the practice, one of the ways I conceptualize what it can do for you is by really slowing down together, um, and applying mindfulness. You like what might have appeared as there's really only one thing you can do. Give it some time and some breath, and then like you can see one other thing to do. Maybe it's implausible, but now you have two choices. And then, the more times you do that, the more it's like you can pretty quickly see like four choices, or there's like this, you can see like the mycelium network of choices just growing. The more slowness, like the more presence, the more mindfulness you bring to your relating, the more like choice opens up. And I'm delighted to hear you say this about like you know um the relationship between the growth of the soul and choice, or like the strengthening of the soul. It's like it does feel like when you're making a choice, it's like your soul gets to express itself, and then there's like this other way of moving in the world that's more default, or like
Mhm.
it's more like there's the one thing that we're doing right now, like um and you can like sense it. I don't know if I could put my finger on how, but it's like
Mhm.
you get a sense for I'm in default consciousness, or like my soul is choosing how it's going to express itself in an incarnate world. There's
Right.
just a difference. I don't know.
Mhm. Yeah, a lot of my teaching comes from, or the biggest influence on me is the diamond approach. So, I worked for Ken Wilber as his videographer, worked for the Integral Center back when they were teaching circling. Uh, but I also had a different path of studying transpersonal psychology through the diamond approach. And this was a really big influence on Guy Sangstock, He read all the books, and uh, there's there's a lot of depth in that teaching, and it's also very detailed and very specific. So because of who I am and how I show up, like I don't quite have the patience to read the 800-page book. Like I'll watch the talks and I'll read, I'll skim the book, and I'd like to come up with these broad summaries. Um, a lot of circling allows us to exercise our sensation, and I'm using this term in a very broad way. Like we sense into other people, we sense into our truth, we sense into the chair beneath us right now, right? We like, how hard is the chair you're sitting in right now? As the listener, if you're in the car, if you're, you know, that same physical sensing, exercising that is somehow mysteriously connected to all the other types of sensing I just mentioned, right? It's connected to empathy. Like, and it's not like we're listening or not listening, we're empathizing or we're not empathizing. It's much more like our ability to sense and know are interconnected. And through circling, we are practicing sensing into other people's truths, which are radically different than ourselves. We're practice sensing into the group field. And if you spend thousands of hours over the course of years doing this practice, you become smarter. This is my belief. And I say that a little bit flippantly, but you become more able to sense truth. Yeah.
I sense truth in what you say.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I really do. I feel there's like um, I think one of the ways I've thought about it in my head is like there's just an art. I like bringing it to sensing the chair underneath you in situations, especially interpersonal ones, that can get very complicated because of different perspectives that are interacting.
Mm-hmm.
It can be very hard to resolve the very obvious things that are right in front of you. It's
Mm-hmm.
just hard to resolve that into a clear picture. It's like when um there's things that, like, I just don't know about myself, but someone can see from a mile away as I'm walking up to them. Like there's just certain things when they're really close up, it's really hard to resolve. And
Yeah.
there's yeah, and I think that is kind of the way I've experienced what you're talking about, where circling gives me this kind of space and a breath, and then like things resolve that are very just true and there. And um yeah, it's like so mysterious. It's Richard Rudd talks about like enlightenment is like finding diamonds in your pocket. And that's really like what's coming up for me is there's a way circling can just show you like it was right there all along. It's right there in front of you. And like, but
Right.
can you actually just sense it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Far out.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is, what the Gnostics called gnosis.
Hmm.
You know, I went to a talk in Berkeley last weekend that was about comparing the Christian mystical tradition, one particular aspect of it uh, called the Desert Fathers,
Hmm.
um, with Sufism and some of these things. And the scholar, he was a religious scholar who was had his PhD and was really into Thomas Merton, and talking about all these things. And I learned a bunch. And there's this word, nous, Nous, which is not the French word for we. And it's like our knowing has um, our knowing is something that we are in relation to directly and can grow. And we can also receive guidance from our own knowing. And the New Age might talk about this in terms of like higher self or something like that. But if we put it into plain terms, it's like our wisdom has a body, which in the Western esoteric tradition, they would call the nous. And we need to invite that body. It's not here automatically. We're not in touch with it automatically. We need to invite it. We need to cultivate it, which is prayer, But here we are in 2025, and like we don't have all these religious structures. Like there's no monastery for me to go to that I would enjoy going into. Like obviously there are some monasteries, but but we do have circling. We do have a place to practice, a group of people who are interested in similar things to us that can reflect with us and are willing to sit down for an hour practice period and perhaps debrief with us. And there's a way in which like we can call on this wisdom body to be closer or in relation with us on a more regular basis. And for me, this is the deeper parts of the practice. It's some of why I'm creating this school is because I do want to attract a group of practitioners who want to explore that together. That's half of it. The other half is it just feels like the world needs it or wants it. Like there's not a lot of places for people to go and study. There's some good choices for training out there to get certified as a facilitator, but I think the world really wants more. That's what I've heard just talking to people and exploring this for weeks and weeks. And yeah, so I said yes.
Yeah, and we are all very grateful that you did. There's a call in there that I hear of so far circling has very much been like a modality you do either you go to circling once a month, or you go to a workshop once in a while, or maybe you take a workshop to become a facilitator so you can fold it into the stuff you offer, your your offerings you do. And that's all wonderful. More circling, I think, the better the world and the better the human soup that we all are marinating in. But yeah, you can like taste the new aeon in circling, and it's there. Like something really special and important and holy is there, and we need the circling monastery. We need the deep time placed in like what actually is this? How far can we go? How far can we go? Like,
right.
No?
Right. Yeah. I feel inspired by it. I'm loving talking with you. And, if you've made it this far in the dialogue and you're somewhat newer to this practice, it really is, the chop wood, carry water of circling is about disidentifying from our cultural conditioning. Like it's just an interesting way to tell the story. It's not exactly true, but I think there's a lot of truth into it. We're all programmed robots. We were programmed by our parents in our churches and our schools And then starting around age, 22, when our nervous system is fully grown, we start a path of authenticity, because in between, age 14 and 22, we're really trying to figure out which social groups we identify with, and which hobbies and professions to wrap our identity around. Our identity's forming, right? But then in adulthood, there's a whole other developmental um, task, which is becoming an authentic person, which is a lot about just like shedding the programming, right? Um, and yeah, I think circling is an excellent tool and place and medicine for that. But it's the beginning of the path of authenticity, right? Authenticity matures. It's not about saying something just because it's edgy, or expression for the sake of expression. Like that's the beginning of the path of authenticity. There's hopefully a maturing.
Yeah, I love that like biographical level of circling. Like as you enter it, it feeds this journey, this kind of, once you're done with like preparing for life, the life is like, okay, now discover discover who you are and what it is, capital I. And there's like a the the maturing of authenticity. I have this sense of like the like Caduceus, you're like weaving authenticity with like what I would call like harmony or something. Like you're weaving back and forth of like you're also in this like almost like sexual union with the rest of incarnate realm. You're like going into and coming out of it, and like getting room for air so you can be more authentic, and then diving back in so you can be so totally connected and one with things. And it's like, yeah, it's an incredible adventure is what is coming up for me hearing you say it. It's like this is the adventure of a lifetime. And I mean, what would you rather be doing? I can't imagine, not being on this adventure, not heeding or hearing the call.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, well, thanks for being on the path with me. Yeah.
Yeah, so now let's as we're like approaching our end, can we talk a little bit about what's it going to be like to enroll in this school and to be a part of this and to take up this call to adventure with Jason Diggs?
Yeah, I'm using a platform that I'm excited about. It's called circle.so. So it's a community-based platform that also delivers courses. So
it's literally called Circle.
Yeah, isn't that funny?
That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, out of all of the 20 different platforms out there that deliver courses, all of them have some kind of community features, but this one just has the community features up front, and it's the user interface is really based around that. And it's called circle.so. And then it's called Integral Circling School, ICS. And so there'll be self-paced study courses, but there'll be events every day, or at least 6 days a week, where organic circles, birthday circles. There's going to be some practices that I call relational inquiry. I'm going to do all the things I want to do. I'm going to teach Enneagram. Enneagram is a really big part of my path. And yeah, people can come and they can be trained as a facilitator. So they can take the leadership and facilitation path and pay a monthly fee. And you don't have to sign up for a full 9-month course to be certified. You can come and be a member for 2 months and study the material. Maybe someone who's even certified in circling, but they haven't done it in like several years or something like that, and they just want to start leading circles again. So it's going to be really accessible. But then there's also a lower, like inexpensive membership where people can just come and attend classes. And so like all of the introductory courses are going to be included in the membership. And then there's the facilitator course is also offered on a monthly membership basis. So I'm just trying to make it flexible, trying to make it, an easy yes for people. And there's people all over that, want to lead circles. There's a lot of people, honestly, who have been leading circles without a lot of training. And so people who just want to fill in their knowledge, and someone who's experienced could probably come in and be certified in 4 to 6 months, even just, with a couple hours per week of practice and learning. So it's primarily an online thing, but I will do in-person courses occasionally. So I'm doing one coming up in May in Tucson. Mm-hmm.
That is so exciting. I love the model of like, you can come in and kind of self-lead how much you drink from it. And then like that will be a full facilitator certification in some cases. Mm-hmm. And then I could imagine like every year coming in for a couple months to like, I want to practice with the ICS people again. And like, like there's sort of like there's so many ways that you can like be nourished by this offering, which I think is really special. And if all goes according to plan, it's becomes available the day that this comes out. Mm-hmm. So if you're hearing this, chances are when you click the link in the show notes, it's going to take you to the right place at the right time.
Right.
And you can begin to sit under the learning tree of Jason Diggs, which is someone who has done it before. I can vouch and say it's a very, very good tree to sit underneath. And
you and Sai came and took a 4-month course.
That's right, with you and on facilitation, and it really dramatically changed the offerings we made and the impact and like the growth we're seeing in our community of practice. And then also like the interdevelopmental growth, like a lot of the approaches to facilitating released me from certain habits that I like my own growth in practice spaces that I was holding was like unleashed by like an order of magnitude. I'm getting more out of the events I'm leading, which is, that's what more could you ask for?
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad you're out there in the world and creating local community and also doing this podcast. I'm really glad this project exists.
Well, thank you, Jason Diggs, for coming on The Container a second time. We're so happy we got to have you. And thank you for the work you do for the movement.
The container is now closed. I know, this moment must come every episode. I just want to say thank you so much, Jason, for coming on and having this far out conversation with Jonathan. Even though I couldn't be a part of it, it was awesome. And thank you so much for resurrecting this incredible integral circling tradition. The world needs this. The world needs you. And remember, everybody, to check out integralcirclingschool.com to get more information about this awesome project that Jason is doing. And as always, we have a really nice way of closing. Keep it namasty.